And this behavior parallels on the horizontal level what we find in the vertical level with idolatry, namely a deliberate suppression of the truth about God available in creation and ongoing creation, nature. So it's impossible to say, as he does, quote, all instances of homosexuality are unnatural for Paul, but only those instances known to his Roman readers are both unnatural and wrong. Rather, one must say that since Paul regarded all instances of homosexual behavior as unnatural, then he regarded them all as wrong, for he deduces their wrongness from their unnaturalness. Moreover, it will not do to argue, as he does, that sometimes actions can be contrary to nature or beyond nature without being sinful. For the way in which contrary to nature is employed in this context in Romans, and indeed the way it's employed in early Jewish literature elsewhere with reference to same-sex intercourse, indicates that it always constitutes a basis for declaring same-sex intercourse as sin. In early Judeo-Christian understanding, some kinds of acts that are contrary to nature are always sinful. Bestiality would be a case in point. This is exactly the case here. This is not a benign instance of acting beyond nature in Paul's opinion. It's a sinful rejection of the way in which God made male and female as creations designed for complementary opposite-sex sexual relationships. Fourth, Paul contends, quote, the condemnations of arsenokoitai, the Greek word for men who lie with males, in 1 Corinthians 6:9, and malakoi, the soft, which Philo understands with comparable usages as referring to the effeminate males who serve as the passive partners in homoerotic relationships. He says the condemnation of these two vices in this text may imply that, generally speaking, men who have sex with other men are acting in a way that's not pleasing to God. But such condemnations do not rule out the possibility that there could be instances in which men who have sex with each other are not behaving as arsenokoitai and malakoi. Again, I don't see how this can be possible. Four subpoints here. A, the term arsenokoitai, first of all, means men who lie with males. How can that not be inclusive? Especially since it's formed off of the Levitical prohibitions, which Powell himself admits are opposed to male-male intercourse on the grounds of what it is not, male-female intercourse. If a man is only supposed to have sex with a woman, what kind of male-male sexual union could not be covered under this term? B, the vice lists in 1 Corinthians 6, 9 to 10 appear within a larger discussion of the case of incest in 1 Corinthians 5. Paul is still making that point here. It's clear what Paul finds wrong with incest. Leviticus 18:6 tells us it's having sex with somebody who is the flesh of one's own flesh. It's having sex with someone who's too much of a familial like, somebody who is already one flesh with you before you have any sexual union with them. This is not a sufficient other. There's a spectrum. You can have too much otherness, bestiality, pedophilia, or too much sameness, incest, same-sex intercourse. There has to be balance within both. This is precisely what's wrong with men who lie with males. They're having sex with another who is too much of a like or same, here a sex or gender same. C, also in the context here is 1 Corinthians 7 about marriage. There Paul discusses only male-female sexual unions. Why? Because these alone are valid. The presumption here, as everywhere in Scripture, is that sex is to be confined to male-female marriage. D, in the probably hypothetical example of Christians soliciting prostitutes in 1 Corinthians 6:12, we have, as I noted earlier, a reference to Genesis 2:24. To juxtapose, man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, with Genesis 2, with the word arsenokoitai, men who lie with males, is to remove any possibility that there might be instances in which men who have sex with each other are not behaving as arsenokoitai. Okay? Point 5. We have one more point to go. According to Powell, quote, celibacy requirements render a homosexual person's life displeasing to God, because such a one is denied a lifetime partner with whom to share one's life and become one. God says it's not good for a human being to be alone. An intimate and to experience becoming one with another, an intimate lifelong relationship through which two persons may be said to become one, citing Genesis 2:24, unquote. We just went through the account of the splitting of the Adam, the human being, into male and female, and the justification given for marriage, which presupposes only a union of male and female can constitute a one-flesh merger. From a biblical standpoint, one cannot blame the absence of a one-flesh sexual relationship among homosexuals on prescriptions against same-sex intercourse. For two people, two men or two women, even if they were permitted to have sexual union, could not become one flesh because they are not non-complementary, because they are non-complementary sexual sames. This is not to say that male or female homosexuals cannot develop an intimate, lifelong relationship, although such a lifelong union, say one lasting 40 years or more, is extremely rare for reasons which we could talk about, not just homophobia, if there's such a thing. It's to say that there is more to becoming one flesh than having an intimate, lifelong relationship. You enter a marriage relationship looking for some things, but you get more than you bargained for by finding out that your partner's not just a replica of you. And then you have to learn to empty yourself in front of one who is another. Number 6, last point on this issue. Powell claims that, quote, "It seems unlikely that Paul would have counseled a homosexual believer simply to remain celibate," unquote. I ask, why would it seem unlikely? Even in 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul states that husbands and wives should not normally deprive one another of sex because of sexual immorality, 7:2-4, even in that chapter he commands that, quote, "If in fact a wife is separated from her husband, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled with her husband." If Paul is able to advocate this for a case which does not involve an unnatural sexual union, that is, one between a male and a female, which is natural, it certainly seems likely that Paul would have counseled the homosexual believer, regardless of homoerotic impulses, to abstain from all unnatural sex, that is, sex with somebody of the same sex. Powell goes on, quote, "More likely Paul would have hoped that the sanctification of a believer would replace the degrading passions with natural yearnings that would allow for a normal heterosexual marriage." And he cites there 1 Corinthians 6:11. Now, certainly Paul would have hoped for this, that their desires would have been transformed into heterosexual desires. We all hope for this. However, hoping for it on the one hand and expecting it as a matter of course on the other are two very different things. There was in the ancient world recognition that some homoerotic attraction may well have been due, at least in part, to congenital factors. Moreover, we have a number of texts. We can go from Plato's Symposium all the way up to the 3rd, 4th century AD texts of Pseudo-Lucian's Affairs of the Heart, and you have numerous statements on pro-homosex literature in antiquity in which the argument is made, who would want to have sex with a woman? I'm only married because of my civic duty, but my erotic attraction is entirely for males. The notion of exclusive homoerotic attraction is hardly new, or a congenital basis for it is hardly new. And in fact, how does Paul interpret sin in Romans 7? Sin is an innate impulse running through the members of the human body, passed on by an ancestor human, and never entirely within human control. That does not exclude something from being sin. That is sin.